Was that Jamie?
That was Dave.
Dave, thank you. Yeah, if you could just say your name so that it's easier for the staff to track, that would be great. Thank you, Dave. And any discussion before we vote? All right, all those in favor of approving minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, minutes approved, thank you. All right, we'll move on down to the committee reports, and we'll start with Program and Youth.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. Our committee had a pretty light agenda last time. David gave a nice review of a lot of the analytics that the WIB is doing, so there was some discussion around that. Tara talked a little bit about, continuing on the subcontractor that was approved, and so that was talked about a little bit. Nothing really to share there. Talked a little bit about the normal, I'm sure the other committees get the Brighton Center updates and those types of things as well. So we got the updates from Ellen and Corey as far as what was going on from that particular perspective. And then Liberty did an update on our finances and accountability and those types of things. So it was a pretty light meeting, and if I recall, I think we may have even finished up a little bit earlier on that as well. The one thing I think that's indicated on today's agenda for the executive committee is yesterday I got an email from Tony about some changes in regards to the I guess it's the let me see if I can find my email that you were talking about it. I guess
it's
it was
the work experience.
Yeah, the way our youth case managers identify when trying to place our youth and experience sites. I guess this new change that's being recommended to us gives some flexibility in not only the number of hours that the youth can work, but the amount of allowable wages. The way it's shared to me is that, some of the benefits to that is the business can hire the youth at, at comparable, equitable rates compared to other employees. And it'll certainly help the area to spend the funding to help us meet our mandatory spending levels. So I believe it was attached to the documentation that was sent out to us. It's a pretty straightforward change. The current policy in your attached information just says, internship/work experience can last up to 60 months or 25 hours per week at $13.25 an hour. And Tony and Tara are recommending that that language be altered to say internships, work experiences can last up to 6 months, up to 40 hours per week, with the pay rate matching the rate of other employees in similar positions up to $16, not to exceed 1,040 hours. Again, I've had no discussions on it, but Tony's email did a good job of explaining it, just kind of articulated that back to you all. It makes sense to me. I mean, we've never experienced this, but for the interns that we bring in, we try to pay them at comparable wages so they don't feel like they're being abused and those types of things. And quite honestly, if it helps us spend the allocated funds that we have, I think that would be a good thing. It's always not a good thing to leave money on the table. But Tony, Tara, is there anything that I missed and you need to add for the committee?
Well, not really. You summarized it perfectly, Jamie, and thank you for that. I will tell you what prompted this. I had a conversation after the last PY meeting. We talked about that we weren't spending the required 20%, at the rate we needed to. And of course, we know that COVID is a big part of that. I also previously had a conversation with Michelle Sesteric, and she mentioned that maybe $13.25 was not necessarily the going rate in this area in a lot of companies. So I asked the case managers, what are your barriers to putting kids in work experience and spending this money? And that was really interesting because the case managers who tend to manage up here in the northern counties, they said the wage was too low. The southern counties they stated that the wage was too high because they tend to deal with the single owner business, the small business. And so a lot of them don't pay in Carroll County. They don't necessarily pay $13.25 an hour. Well, the way it is written, which the WIB implemented back when WIOA came out, it was $13.25. There was no flexibility. And so with this new phrasing, it gives us flexibility to pay at the going rate per company and to have some flexibility from county to county, industry to industry. So that's
I think the up to $16 an hour is good wording because, as an HR person, I wouldn't want to pay an intern more than my regular staff, especially if they found out about that. So
yes,
at least you can match the appropriate wage and not pay something that you're.
Yeah, and just for the information of the group, this is not a state. That was one of the questions I had. That's not a state number or goal. That was something that the local WIB put in place. So we don't have to go through all those hoops to work with the state, and we're not violating anything by changing it because that's something that we implemented locally. So we do have the ability to do that within this group.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so Jamie needs a motion. And it would be a motion to approve the updated language as proposed by the WIB staff. So
Michelle Sesteric, so moved.
Okay, wait, before you do that, Michelle, is there anything you want to add to the motion, Jamie?
Sorry.
No,
Okay, Michelle, thank you. Can we get a second?
I'm Baines, second.
That was John Baines.
All right, any more conversation or any additional questions? All right, let's vote. And all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? And I don't think so, but any abstentions, just for the record? Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Passed. And Jamie, do you have anything else from the committee to report?
not at this time.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. All right, on to MBO. John.
MBO, we had our meeting Monday.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm just looking at my calendar here. It's a blur of days. We stayed on the topic of bylaws again. So last meeting, you may recall, we brought up the concerns we had about some of the language specific to terms and start dates and limits. So we have taken that feedback from you and are still waiting to kind of finalize all of that. But we found some other language that we would also like to clean up. One in part because we find the current language confusing and contradictory. So not great for an operating agreement and bylaws. And the other piece is we find it unnecessarily restricting, sort of like the language that we had for business percentage in the committee level that we felt was sort of unnecessary at that level. So in respect to this, it's about the officer position, specifically chairperson. Right now, according to the bylaws, the chairperson must have previously been an officer, meaning vice chair, secretary, or treasurer. And in a separate paragraph of the bylaws, they must have also been a committee chair. So we felt that's a kind of a lot of hoops to jump through before taking on the leadership role, and wanted to eliminate the requirement of previously serving in an officer capacity. We did want to maintain the requirement of having previously been a committee chair because it shows and demonstrates the responsibility and leadership on behalf of the WIB and taking the additional challenge on that requires. It also means that that person is serving on the executive committee. So they're getting to see what happens in this room, what are we talking about, and a good glimpse into what makes a good board chair. So we believe that is something we want to maintain. So we're working on draft language. Since we just met on Monday, we're kind of waiting for the first proposal and then our committee feedback to that first proposal. But essentially it will be getting rid of any founding language that we had in the beginning document that was related to this WIB being newly constructed under WIOA. So we want to keep this as more of a running language. And then we will consolidate all of the chairperson requirements into one section to keep it together. I think, was there one other comment to that, Tara, that I feel like I'm missing one other guideline? Oh,
One of the things was
ideas that we think would be beneficial, but we are wondering if that's better to wait and keep it off the record for now, as opposed to make it feel more mandatory within the bylaws. So it was looking at in terms of, sorry, I'm getting my thoughts together here. It's relating back to also how the whole nominating process happens, which is also kind of a black box within the bylaws. So somehow MBO comes up with candidates and then presents them to the executive committee, and then the board votes on those people. So there's kind of a big jump between how we bring the lists together from we're not sure where, what happens in this committee, that there's then a vote. So the idea is that we would call for nominations at our January WIB meeting and our March WIB meeting. So 2 opportunities to let people know that this is an opportunity that's available, and we can kind of talk about what this looks like, what's required, and certainly the eligibility requirements. And the second call is simply because people don't hear it the first time, so you need to keep reminding them. And then from that list, we would bring all of those who self-nominated, those who nominated others, and then any candidates that we feel would be good to bring into the fold, to bring that to the executive committee for us to essentially narrow the list down to a unanimous candidate or a consensus candidate for each of the officer positions. That slate would then come back to the WIB for the May meeting?
May.
For a vote. And that is every 2 years at the end of the fiscal year. So we have that as an action item coming up for 2021. So that would be the process we'd like to follow, and then also to document that in the bylaws.
So quick question, just to point of clarification, officers are chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer. Is that it? Just those
That's
4?
it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And we decide, because I know we had this conversation previously related to just members of the WIB and how we're getting away from doing that based on fiscal year. But remind me, did we decide that the officers still need to be in line with that fiscal year, right? That's what we decided.
Correct.
And that's why you're doing, that explains the timing of what you're talking about, John. Okay.
Correct. And we would also clean the language up to make it very clear that it's a 2-year appointment at those positions.
Yeah. Okay.
And I would just really quickly, just sorry to interrupt, but the hope is sort of based on the timing required that, John's outlining everything perfectly, and I wish I had had a chance to provide you the written, but he's going through every bit of it now. My hope is that on Friday, I'll be able to have some time to finalize all those items in the bylaws and get those out to everybody. It would not require a vote today anyway, but to enable the board to see these at the January meeting, because if you remember, it takes a reading and then they would have to be passed at the subsequent meeting after we mail them out. So that way that we could get that all finished, for a vote in March. and sort of simultaneously be announcing in January and in March. I mean, that's not necessarily a bylaw requirement, but it's just nice to outline the timing, but to let everybody know that in January and in March that the MBO is seeking nominations. Because it does say in the bylaws in the description of committees that the MBO will put together a slate, but it doesn't necessarily say how exactly that works.
So if I could just add one thing to what John laid out perfectly. At the end of the process, which would be July at this point, the MBO will go back and formalize what made sense so that we don't have any confusion going on forward or any kind of misunderstanding, so that we're a little bit more streamlined when we do this next year or at the next opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. That's a good reminder of that. So what I've talked about so far is specific to the bylaws and things that need to be, sort of absolute rule. What Dave is highlighting is that there's a lot of things that are not bylaw related, but would be helpful to manage the process and to document that. So you have an ex-Toyota guy and an ex-advanced manufacturing person. So we definitely are going to bring some flow charts into this.
Yeah.
And John, I'm sure in the bylaws, we have to account for the what ifs, right? So with some kind of caveat that says, should we have a vacancy when it's not on those cycles per se, we've got the ability to do a similar process, but just without the all call.
So that actually is already in the bylaws, and that's discretionary for the executive committee to the interim or whatever that's called, to fill in a vacant seat. And that term expires when it was originally slated to expire.
You're going to actually be doing something like that here in just a second.
So let me, okay. So what you're describing is, so simultaneously what will be happening is this new, I'm going to call it a process, for lack of a better word, will be presented to the WIB, but at the same time, we'll actually be doing this, right? Because we've got some officers who are coming off the end of June, so we have to actually start doing this starting in January. So am I saying that right? So we're proposing this at the same time we're actually going to have to be doing it.
Yes, I would just say that what we are proposing is more clarifying language. And so what we will be doing come January, both in respects for call for nominations, with respect to renominating Michelle as a WIB member, all those things we've been talking about, none of those are against the bylaws. So we will be behaving the way we want to behave, but we recognize the bylaws are confusing with respect to those steps.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we avoid any chance for impropriety or sense that we're not operating according to the bylaws, because like I said, the language there is very contradictory.
Yeah.
It's fun to read, by the way. So this will be a rather large red line document, what we will send out for a vote, because we have now made so many changes that we need to finalize and get approved. It began with a sentence, and now I'm pretty sure we've covered like 6 pages. So
Thanks for taking that on, John. I think the document was overdue for that anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, now that helps. So it's more consistent with our practice. It's just clarifying some things that are kind of in the black hole, so to speak, of like the man behind the curtain kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay.
I want to thank Tara, because coming in as the new executive director and just having the fresh eyes of looking at like, why do we do it this way? Why does it say that? Quite frankly, I didn't have a good answer for any of those questions. So it was a matter of saying, that's great. Let's clean that up and make sure that it's really clear for us moving forward. Same thing with Dave's suggestion to create guidelines and processes that support those documents, just to help make life better.
Yep. All right.
So that's the meeting update. There is an action to take. So as you recall, I think at the last full WIB meeting, We welcomed a new member, Dr. Carissa Schutzman, from a different organization than she had been previously before. So as such, we have this new person on the executive committee that we want to nominate for secretary. The last secretary is wonderful, but we have high expectations for this new secretary. So I would request a nomination to this post, or how do we actually word this?
You need it. So you need a motion to approve Carissa as the board secretary, representing her new company. Is basically what you need.
Yes, so this is to fill the vacancy that Dr. Carissa Schutzman left. So I need a motion to nominate Dr. Carissa Schutzman into that vacancy.
Right.
This is Jamie. I make the motion to nominate Carissa Schutzman to the vacant secretary position for the board.
Can I get a
Jamie.
second?
I'll second. This is Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And one abstention. Dr. Schutzman, one
Yes.
abstention.
Yes, I'll abstain. Thank you.
Glad you didn't say no.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
So you're telling me there's an out?
Yeah.
No,
This is the Godfather. I've learned that early on. So
no out.
they keep pulling you back
Yeah,
in.
welcome back into the fold, Carissa.
Thank you.
Thrilled
Thank
that you're staying with us. So thank you.
Feels like home here on the Zoom.
Yeah.
I saw the best meme the other day. It was the Muppets, and they said that's today's Zoom. Remember, they'd all be in their little squares.
Love it. Love it.
I was amused.
Yeah. Okay, John, anything else for MBO?
That concludes my committee report.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Business services, Dave?
Oh, thank you. I did hear Michelle C. Did you have a hard stop at 4?
I do.
Is there anything you want to talk about, seeing there's only 3 minutes? Because I'm going to take a little bit more than 3 minutes.
Okay, well, I don't, the only thing that I would add though is I am having some great conversations with, Northern Kentucky SHRM and Northern Kentucky Chamber and Grow, Terrace becoming, kind of part of that. And we're trying again to make sure that we're collaborating and not duplicating. But yeah, I didn't have anything in particular to report, Dave. Thanks for giving me a minute.
Okay, great. All right, well, great. So very quickly, we had a lot of activity in the BSC meeting on Monday. It was Monday, I think, right? Monday or Tuesday. It was earlier this week that we met. And we had 2 major activities. One was talking a little bit about the career certification for new access points. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then also we went through the industry certification activity, and I want to share a schedule about that in a minute or two. But as far as the meeting went through, Corey went through the operator highlights. Just a quick blurb about that is that most of the career centers are open. They are accepting walk-ins. They are working on those one-on-one with the appropriate security and safety measures that have been put in place. There was some dialogue about safety and security, and I think we were pretty satisfied with what the KCC was doing. The numbers have been going up. They went up very high the first week, and then the second week they dipped down, but the third and fourth weeks, they got back up to the higher point. So we do know that there's a service that's been needed in that site. And Tara, remind me, but it's only the Madison Road site that's open right now. Is that right?
So actually, all of the locations are having some level of appointments. The staff is starting first with offering a virtual option. So either phone, email, or Zoom, depending on the capability of the client. If the client is not able to participate in a meeting, in one of those virtual ways, then they are making available very socially distanced in-person opportunities with masks and all the PPE included. When it was better weather outdoors, they were having that outdoors. Now that we're indoors, we're trying not to go against the governor's orders, but yet we're still trying very hard to provide people with opportunities to connect with employers, from a job seeker standpoint. Right now, the resource rooms are not open because we just felt like that was sort of one more way. We were talking about, they are thinking now of starting to open those in January with the idea that they would be even more distance than what we had originally planned. They were definitely going to have at least 6 feet before, but now I think they're going to have more like 10 between computers. It would be, operating at the same time. They're thinking about the idea of having interviews. Most of those would be, again, virtual, but if somebody just really, they had the drive-through interviews and drive-through job hiring events. Sorry, this is kind of a long answer, Dave. When it was summer, and they're really trying to figure out what is the opportunity for that now that the weather just really doesn't permit people to be, working outdoors for long periods of time when it's like below freezing. So, but definitely focusing the most on health and safety for everyone. So it's happening slowly. I mean, the numbers are higher. Like you said, they're certainly nowhere near what they would have been like pre-COVID. A lot of people have figured out how to do things virtually. So the in-person is really just for those clients that just still don't have the access to the computer that would be required.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification, Tara. The action item that occurred in the meeting was certification of 3 new access points. If you recall, at our last full WIB meeting, we brought forward the airport and the Kenton County Library. We now have 3 more that were visited by the staff and by a WIB member. Owington County Public Library, Pendleton County Library, and the Career Center in Carrollton. So all 3 of those passed the review by the appropriate authorities and were carried by motion inside the meeting. So we're pretty happy about that. The second part of the meeting was a pretty in-depth conversation regarding industry certifications. We had a number of guests that joined the meeting, primarily educators. We had Karen Chesser with Fort Thomas school system. We had Randy Poe with the educational committee, let's see, which Education Council. I get the co-op and the council mixed up from time to time. Don't tell him that. We had some Navigo folks and some Learning Grow folks and Grow there to talk a little bit about certifications. And the conversation centered around what the employer's needs are, how the schools are delivering to those. And then we also had a gentleman named Kylie Whitaker, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, from the Kentucky Department of Education that outlined the process that the WIB needs to put together to forward appropriate certifications so that students can get the credit needed and the schools can begin to offer those if there's a need. Additionally, we had Gateway people as part of this conversation. It was a good conversation. A lot of information was shared. What is actually going to happen is we are going to regroup based on our notes from the meeting. We will be pulling together a survey to go out to the WIB at the end of the year to talk a little bit about certifications that are required by the business partners as part of the WIB. We, at the next full WIB meeting in January, we will request an ad hoc committee be put together to look at potential certifications that are required. I expect that work to take place from mid-January to about mid-February. We'll bring those credentials that are being asked about by businesses to the BSC at the February meeting, and then bring them forward for full WIB approval in March. And then based on those approvals, we will forward that request to the KWIB, which acts as our proxy and dialogue with the Kentucky Department of Education. It's kind of a very quick schedule right now because we're a little bit behind the times. As John alluded to, we didn't really have a good process in place to begin with. Second, the COVID has kind of thrown us into our timeline, and so hopefully we'll be able to make some recommendations at the March meeting to go forward. And then, as I mentioned with the MBO meeting, we'll probably put a process in place to make this a little bit streamlined. The idea for the ad hoc committee will be able to, is really only to make sure that we gather in our high performing sectors the understood recommendations now that are needed. I don't think you're going to see anything outlandish come forward, but we just want to validate what's already in place and make sure that the educators have the ability to provide that to the students and to the young adults also in the case of potential community college work. And then also make sure that we were able to advertise that to candidates. So real quick, that's kind of where we're at.
All right.
Tara, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to say that while I completely agree that we are a little behind in where we would like to be with this conversation this year, the good news is that we're actually ahead of most of the other areas because the state actually still has not provided the data that is supposed to be used in order to do this work and make these recommendations. But because we have the subscriptions to Burning Glass and some of the other things that David Klockner is able to look at, we're able to go ahead. This is an every 2-year process where we're asked as a WIB to look at these certifications and to make recommendations. It's really supposed to be on behalf of the business community. And so it's really up to us to come up with that process of what does that look like to help educators and local employers come together. So even though we're a little behind, we're actually doing pretty well in comparison to where we would be if we didn't already have access to some data and the passion of a certain committee chair to make sure that this moves ahead. So we're doing pretty well, I think.
Thanks, but I think you bring up a really important point. If we didn't have David Kay working on this until he had blood on his fingernails during the month of December, we would probably be SOL. So it's great to have the staff engaged. That's for sure.
For sure.
All right, that's all. Any questions? Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, Dave, thank you. So no action, there's action for a full WIB, but none for this group, right?
Correct.
That's right.
Okay. All right, so let's then move on to the programming updates. So Tara, the director's report.
Yes, and I am gonna reserve sharing the screen again until we get to just a little bit further in the report. So I wanted to just cover, there's a lot going on. I actually have an annual report that I plan to send out this week that we prepared to just give you a glimpse of all the different things that we've been working on. And there really is a lot. Wanted to though highlight some of the challenges. So want to start with, there are a lot of good things going on. The staff is working really, really hard to address populations that have barriers, like people coming out of recovery. We're moving ahead with that SAMHSA grant. We're still waiting on our MOU, but we are feeling good about the progress that's being made toward that with St. Elizabeth. So Jamie, we're really excited to be working with some of your colleagues, Amy Brown and some of those in Roseanne's team. But that's really good. We did receive some additional funding with the National Dislocated Worker Grant. So as we think about people who are experiencing, a layoff, and how do we have a lot of job openings in Northern Kentucky. So we're really looking at this recovery, the trends that we've seen over the last year. We actually received $400,000 additional dollars to spend by March of 2022. So we're taking the opportunity to see, what we've learned. We have noted that it's been a little harder to find candidates than we thought. The good news is we think that's because these are temporary jobs, and there's a lot of permanent jobs out there right now. So how do we make sure that we're connecting with individuals that have some kind of barrier to help this really help them be a link from where they were to get back, on their feet? And so we've connected with United Way to talk with some of the nonprofits that they work with. How do they help populations that are maybe in a little bit more of a transition? We are working with a number of organizations, and obviously our friends at the KCC to really to get the word out. And we will be putting a call out for additional employer partners, both expanding and making sure we put the word out, if you all remember, back in March, April, when we originally applied for this. And it was very much an all call. If anyone's interested, let us know if you were interested in being an employer partner. And with the funding we received, we're actually able to fund every single partner that expressed an interest, which was great. But with this additional funding, we will need some additional partners. Those that came forward all happen to be in Boone, Kent, and Campbell. Those were the counties that happened to be also more affected by COVID and tended to be more affected by layoffs. So sort of worked out that way. But we are going to be looking at what the need might be in our 5 rural counties and getting some employer partners down that way as well. We also are working with KCC to, we haven't named this program yet because we really saw it as being temporary. But because it's now going to extend for another year, we're going to give it a name. So it's going to be the NKY Career Link, a rapid reemployment program, which we love the term rapid reemployment. Chris is laughing. You can imagine how long we sat around on the Zoom and thought through what that name might be, and what the positive connotation of the word link versus bridge versus, some other kind of phrasing. But luckily, none of us have careers in branding because it's not very easy. But anyway, I think having a name and having it be more positive will be helpful. And we're just going to continue on with that. But like I said, those are some of the highlights, and really been pleased with everybody's work on those. I did want to mention
that, I would just add a comment there. Obviously, it's certainly important to get to the applicants for that temporary job and stuff, but I think it's equally important to get to the employers so that they know that it's out there. I mean, for better or for worse, I had overlooked that. And, we're in an industry right now that because of COVID, we need a lot of temporary workers. And so I have a meeting on Friday to talk about that with Ellen, but there are a lot of employers out there that could also help get the word out. And obviously in our case, we've got websites and everything else we can communicate that on, but.
Absolutely. I will remind that, and we'll have to figure out what the situation is for St. Elizabeth in particular, that we do have some rules around if we're fully funding the position, it needs to be with a nonprofit. So we get into some eligibility things there, but happy to work through all that to get employers the help that they need. For sure.
In our case, we're still a nonprofit, so that won't hurt us.
Right. But just so you know, for other employer friends, that that's a piece of it. There is an option to do 50% through an on-the-job training arrangement. In the past, we haven't had a lot of success. Our employers typically just don't want to jump through those hurdles when they can employ people themselves. But yeah, I completely agree with you, Jamie. We don't want to have job seekers and not have places for them to go, right? And we definitely want to help our employers that are needing additional assistance right now. I will say the biggest challenge has been finding people to take those temporary jobs, as I think you've probably experienced.
Well, I mean, again, I can only speak for my industry, but a lot of people take jobs knowing they're getting their foot in the door here and that they're going to apply for, full-time
Right.
jobs. So I don't know how that works in other industries, but that's a big part of why people take jobs here, knowing that they're getting their foot in the door.
Yes. And that's how we're going to try to better communicate it moving forward, for sure. And that's the idea of the naming and everything, is to make it a little bit more exciting. So quickly, to just let you all know some of the challenges that we've been having. I think I've mentioned this over the last several months, but just as a recap, there have been a lot of transitions with our friends in Frankfurt. The Commonwealth, we had a relatively new governor when COVID hit. There were some changes with the cabinet for education and workforce development, which has traditionally been the cabinet that we have interacted with for all of our WIOA work. Then in August, so August 16th, it was effective that unemployment insurance and the career development office moved to the labor cabinet. And so that has created a lot of confusion for our colleagues in Frankfurt as they are trying to just kind of get their messaging consistent. There's been a lot of mixed signals and confusion related to, I'll give you one example. So the lease in Covington, at the Covington Career Center, we have a lease directly with the city of Covington, and then the state career development office has a lease directly with the city of Covington. Thank goodness those are separated. But the lease for that facility for the state is now going to be governed by the labor cabinet. The lease that we interact with in Florence is staying with the education and workforce cabinet. I mean, that's just a silly little example, but there's just a lot of who was going to pay the bills was an example. There's a career center in another part of this Commonwealth that their water was turned off because no one knew to pay the bill. So I just mentioned that because there have been a lot of time spent just working with our colleagues in Frankfurt and trying to understand what the new processes will be. Liberty works on trade. She received the funding, but she didn't receive any of the documentation required to go with that funding for the trade program. We have received word that some of the work for unemployment insurance that we did, we might need to find additional funding for that. The state says it's on its way, but then we talk to another person and they say, oh no, everything's fine. So I just thought that I would let you all know that there are a lot of challenges. They don't really require board action at the moment, but I did just want to bring to your all's attention that with that confusion, it does take time from all the staff as we're working through that. And I did want you to know, especially this unemployment insurance question, I don't really have a whole lot to report at the moment other than we're being asked to, pull information and we know that it'll just take time away from the other things that we like to be doing. So I don't know if there's any questions about all that, but just wanted to let you all know that it's a little bit of a frustration. I'd rather spend time talking about the strategic plan, and I have a PowerPoint to share with you guys. So, but did want to make sure if you had a question that you had a chance to answer that.
I had one other thing on a different topic, but
yeah,
I guess it's here about as well as anywhere.
Sure.
We had talked about having some kind of statement for diversity and inclusion. And so you know, I just went out to our website to see if we'd done anything yet, and I didn't see anything. So I would still push us to have some type of statement on diversity and inclusion.
You'll need to unlock your device.
I think my phone thinks I'm talking to it. You know, I've learned here in the community, like working with the Hispanic community, that, you know, they have a lot of fear about working with like services that we offer and services in healthcare. When I say we, I mean WIB. So showing our support with them, I think, makes them feel a little bit more at ease. But I will tell you, I just pulled up the website because, again, I was just curious it was up there. We might want to look at updating our website. It still has Andy as the chair and Vera Hall as the treasurer, and I'm looking
Which
at it right now.
What website are you looking at?
It's the Northern Kentucky ad. It's 1977. Home services for individuals, services for employers.
So
WIB,
just so
Northern.
Okay, so just so you know, we I will take a look at that. We actually submitted a lot of changes about 3 weeks ago to the ads IT staff to be updated. So I'll check in to see where they are with that. We typically see the nkcareercenter.org website as really our website of record. So I can put it in the chat. So I will make sure that what's going on with the ads site, but
yeah, I mean, if you Google Northern Kentucky WIB, this is the first thing that pops up on Google. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We, like I said, we noted that a while back and submitted all of those updates. So I'm not sure, definitely need to double check and see where that is. But we do use kind of co-branded with the Career Center, that website. And that's something that we might want to think about, right, moving forward. Totally agree on the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation. And I'm hoping that that is something that can be a part of updating, as we do our local plan, our board mission, vision, and value statements. I definitely see those value statements as a place that would make a lot of sense to include our commitment to inclusion and equity there. So Dana, if you're okay with it, I can share my PowerPoint now and just kind of walk everybody through what we're thinking for updating the local plan. Is that fine?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, great. So let's see here. Okay, okay, it's in the folder, but the folder doesn't remember. There it is. Great. Okay, so just as a reminder, we are required by WIOA and by the Commonwealth of Kentucky to update our local plan every 4 years. And we are required to align that local plan with the state plan, which was just reconfirmed this year by Governor Beshear, and align it with our regional plan, which is a grouping of Bluegrass, Lincoln Trail. Normally it would be Louisville, but they opted out to join with Indiana and ourselves. And that one was passed in 2019. So if you go to the nkcareercenter.org site and you look at our local plan, you'll find, I believe it's 164 pages long, which feels quite daunting. But once you really start diving into the actual questions, there's actually only 30 questions that need to be answered, and they're divided out into 5 chapters. So economic and workforce analysis, the strategic vision and goals, which we were just talking about just a moment ago, alignment of our local and regional partnerships and investment strategies, program design and evaluation, and then compliance, performance, and administrative costs. So as we look for how we're going to get this done and updated, as we are required to do this year, I want to assure you that this is work that thankfully is already ongoing and will also be helpful in other ways. So it's not just a plan, just to have a plan. The chapter number 1 that talks about workforce analysis, this is pretty much the exact same work that the Business Services Committee is doing that Dave described. we're going to be pulling the exact same information, and we'll be able to put it right in chapter 1. And then we'll be able to use that as we think about target industries, alignment with partners, etc. And speaking of alignment with partners, chapter 3, so much of the work that we're doing with Grow NKY, with the Education Council, with other partners, identifying our workforce development goals across the entire region and the ecosystem, those will be able to put into the plan as well. So a lot of this has started already. And then I'm hoping that the board conversation and discussion, things like, you know, new conversations that for this board, like diversity, equity, inclusion, conversations about what the top priorities and strategies are. I'm hoping that those new conversations that are going to be added to the plan will be able to be leveraged to create like a 2-page document that really outlines the board's strategic thinking for the next few years as well. So I think we all know if something's longer than just a couple pages, it's very difficult to track. And so it's really important to me that the final document actually be 2 different documents, the required lengthy local plan, as well as a much shorter and easy to navigate strategic plan that will really be able to be a guide. Okay, so I've divided this out a couple different ways, so it's hopefully easy to see. There's 5 chapters. And so I talked to Dana about this, and this is our vision for the responsibilities by committee for getting the answers, you know, basically taking the lead. And then all of this will need to be affirmed by the full board. Chapter 1, already talked about, it's really being led already by business services. Chapter 2, and we'll get into what these details are in a bit, but those will be executive committee, this committee, and the MBO. Chapters 3 and 4 will be a combination of program and youth and BSC. And then chapter 5 really will be executive committee. All of these will have the assistance of the staff, of course, and we are putting together a planning committee. This will be separate from the BSC's ad hoc committee, but a few additional individuals who are interested in taking part and being able to support the process as we go forward. I meant to take this slide out, Dana, I'm sorry. We'll just move right to this one, which is our timeline. These are proposed meetings in a couple cases, as well as the existing planned meetings for the full WIB and each committee. So I anticipate that if we can have the planning committee meeting basically once a month, especially maybe twice on the months that we don't already have committee meetings, we should be able to have a proposal to the WIB in March with a rough draft, continue conversations through April, a final vote by both the WIB and the local elected officials in May, which will fit well with our timeline. I will say that we have heard nothing about this from the state, but based on all the regulations, we know that it's going to be due. And so we need to do it anyway, despite the lack of guidance from them. Okay, so just briefly, chapter 1 is all about economic and workforce analysis. So we're already convening in that space. Chapter 2 is all about strategic vision and goals. So this is where the executive committee, the MBO, and that strategic planning ad hoc committee will be reviewing the mission, the vision, the values, and refreshing. I said refreshing if needed, certainly hoping that we'll be able to add those DEI elements that Jamie mentioned, and maybe others as well. Chapters 3 and 4 is all about our partnership and strategy in chapter 3, and then program design and evaluation in chapter 4. They really are kind of 2 parts the same coin, so I'm putting them together. We'll be looking at what are the strategies for meeting the needs of job seekers, and what are the strategies for meeting the needs of local employers, and how we're doing that along with our partners. So likely we'll divide that up where the job seekers will be addressed in the program youth committee, meeting the needs of employers and what that partner engagement piece looks like, and as well as so local and state partners with the BSC. Chapter 5 has just a couple questions around compliance, performance, and administrative costs. So this will be, again, primarily the executive committee reviewing those, and updating any processes if necessary. I'm going to stop there, though I do have lots of extra materials if anybody has any questions. I am going to stop sharing just so I can see your faces, but we can turn back to that if needed.
So Tara, this is Dave. This looks like a doable plan, and I appreciate all the time that you put in, and it looks like it's laid out pretty well. When you say that you're going to be able to support it with staff, are we talking about ad staff, or are we talking about career center staff, or a combination? Because in some cases, the know-how and the knowledge base is really at the career center rather than at the ad or even in the committee.
So I would say that, well, here's an example. The writing of the plan and the the process management piece, that will be done by primarily myself, but ad staff. But we know that from an input standpoint, like for example, for chapter 1, I've already reached out to the business services representatives team, Eric Owsley and all of his team, to provide input about that workforce analysis piece and the industry certifications piece. And so we know that we'll be leaning on the KCC staff for some of those, some of that knowledge base, but the writing of the plan itself will be the WIB staff that are housed at the ad.
Right. I just want to make sure that we maintain a two-way dialogue with from top to bottom, from the management level to the working level, and making sure that the ideas flow correctly, and each group feels represented, and it's not upper management dictating to the workforce or vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. I have also already reported about this planning process to what we call the business services team, which is the coalition of all workforce development partners. So like Triad, Grow, Gateway, I know I'm the state, I'm missing some, but anyway, it's a gathering that every other week of partners to get together and talk about local workforce development needs. So to let them know that this is upcoming as well, because I think, like you say, this knowledge is not confined within just, our staff. Right. So, and obviously we have, open meetings, and I've really encouraged them if they have anything that they'd like to bring forward, to do that early on. So,
okay, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, and one thing I would add, and I know Terry, you talked about this at the beginning. This is the plan itself, like the state plan. It's fairly lengthy, and when Tara and I were talking about this, what ultimately we want to get out of this is, we've had a strategic plan in place for years, and it was very performance driven, service driven, and we don't want to necessarily get away from that. So what I'm envisioning coming out of this work is, a 1 or 2 page working document that this group can refer to. So it's pulling elements, Dave, out of those chapters that Tara was going through. And absolutely will require partnership and collaboration and input from the service providers and community and the business partners and stuff like that. But the plan itself is the formal official plan is fairly lengthy, but for purposes of us and what what we're holding our vendors, if you will, accountable for is going to be much smaller, and something that is kind of a living, breathing thing, if that makes sense.
So Tara, I have a question, just because it's happened to us now. And in my last employer, we had operations in Tennessee and Virginia, and I had to work with basically both those WIBs, with the Tennessee one kind of reaching out to the Virginia one every once in a while. Now that St. Elizabeth has multi-state operations, what do I now have to start working with the Indiana WIB for my particular employer? How does that work around here? And I'm thinking about it from a strategic planning, maybe think about it, but how does that work with our WIB for our employers that have operations in, Kentucky, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that, so I would say that generally in terms of services that we provide to employers, we certainly work with employers that have operations all over, even globally. But we do tend to focus on the operations that they have inside of our 8-county region. One of the things that had been in place, I don't really know how many years ago, was a coalition between the WIBs in Southwest Ohio, Southeast Indiana, and Northern Kentucky. And if you all remember that, it was called Employers First for some of you that have been around for a little while. That effort kind of fell by the wayside for a few different reasons. One of which was that the group Partners for a Competitive Workforce was created, and it kind of took that spot, and they were doing a lot of like a similar work in terms of thinking like regionally. But now, Partners for a Competitive Workforce was housed at United Way of Greater Cincinnati, and that effort has ended. And so something that has been on my list, I've been working to really build a relationship with Sherry Kelly Marshall, who is my colleague counterpart in Southwest Ohio. She's been saying that she was going to retire, I think, for quite a while, like many years. But apparently I saw it was like official in writing that she is retiring at the end of this month, after a very long and successful career. And so it is my intention, Jamie, that when her successor is named, to make sure that we are building, continuing to build that relationship like I was doing with Sherry, to make sure that we're working together. They have very different rules in Ohio than we do, just to be totally honest. But I do need to reach out to Indiana as well. So happy if you see that as something that you think would be beneficial to many local employers, certainly there's plenty that cross boundaries across our tri-state area. I could definitely see that as being something that we should call out, in the partnership section. That would be that chapter 3 around, something that we see a need for even greater, alignment and partnership across the states. I could see that as being something you might want to look at, and I'll try to make a note of it. So my plan is to create a survey, which Dave mentioned, that could be a way to, not too long, I'll do my best to keep it brief, but to get feedback from board members as a starting point for this conversation. Some of them will be very specific about, read the mission statement and see what you think is missing and let us know what those items might be. Some of them might be an opportunity to rank populations that you think that need the most assistance, or types of our industry sectors that, you think might need some additional care because of COVID or something like that. But all of that will go into some of the preliminary work for the meeting in January, so that it's not the first time that the members are thinking about these topics when we gather on the 12th.
Okay, thanks. I was just curious how it worked.
Yeah, great question. And yeah, being across state lines certainly creates some challenges for sure. And I will say that's why Louisville is a bi-state. They've made that leap to be a bi-state region. Did anybody have any other questions about the strategic plan? We have a few more minutes, so we do have Liberty with us if you would like to see the financial KPI.
So just before we do that, can you just, Tara, quickly pull up the timeline again? Because I know we went through that pretty quickly, and we're introducing this topic to kind of kick that off. To let you know that we'll be starting and what our timelines look like. In addition, we did have some people who kind of put their hand up that want to assist with the strategic planning process in conjunction with us as executive committee. So it's just 2 or 3 people. So we'll make sure that they're involved as well, but you know, the timing is, you know, timing is going to be, I just want you to see, because there's some, we tried to fit this into the regular meetings as much as possible, but there is some work that needs to happen. So there are some like working sessions that are on this list. So just to kind of, you know, be prepared for that, when at the beginning of the year, you may start seeing some meeting invites coming your way that are outside of our normal session, or not outside of our normal meetings.
I'm sorry, it's Dana, it's stuck.
Okay.
Share this document out with us.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry.
It's okay, Tara. That's all right. It's just share it. Just share it. Just email it out. It's fine. I just wanted to note that because it's, you know, again, while we tried to be very conscious, we try to be very conscious of time. This is one of those things where we basically have to get down and dirty and do these working sessions to get this knocked out by, you know, by the timeline that we're looking at. So, you know, it's because we have the state plan, and which is also regional. So, right, we have a lot of moving parts with this. So just pay attention to those timelines.
Yep. Would you be interested in me sending it out? I was going to send an email out to the entire board with our area development district annual report. Do you think it would be helpful if I sent just the PowerPoint, the 10 slides that I showed you, to the full board to just announce the timeline, or do you think that would be confusing? I could see a benefit of just letting them know, hey, heads up for, you know, January, and introducing the survey that way too.
I don't know that I have a strong feeling one way or another. I don't know if anybody else on the committee does. I don't want to send information prematurely and then have to retract anything. But I think with the outline that you sent, that's pretty solid. You know, I'm all about information sharing. On the other hand, I don't know that at this point, if it's too early for them, you know, it may just be better just to say, hey, this is what's coming up. Here's the timeline. Your executive committee and a handful of other folks who put their hands up are starting on this. And so, and maybe it's just a heads up that you know, look for some action items at some of the subsequent meetings. I don't, does anybody have a different thought? Anybody else on the call?
I think my opinion is that I think it would be good to share, but I think what's really more important is the letter or the paragraph that introduces it to the membership, Tara. I think depending on how you word that is really going to be how it's taken. And I think back to what Jamie said about the challenges for diversity and inclusion, the opportunities that we have to continue to be a high-performing WIB. I think if we weave that into the introduction letter, I think the PowerPoint's fine. But if you just drop it and say, hey, we're going to be working on this, people are either going to get jazzed or they're going to turn off, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's really how you introduce it.
Okay. I'm just going to make a note of that, about weaving in that it's an opportunity.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'll get that out to everybody. I might, just on the interest of time, I might just send it first to you guys, but I think maybe I'll send it when I send the survey, so that then they could see where the survey fits into the rest.
Yeah.
So, okay. Dana, did you have anything else that you wanted to share about that, or anything I didn't cover that? Okay.
No.
I really do think it's going to be a really great opportunity to really think through some of these. There's a lot going on in the community right now, and I think it's really actually quite good timing for the board to set some high level, you know, priorities. So I do actually think it's quite good timing. Okay, let's see. I went away from the agenda, but I believe what we have left to share with you is our financial report. Let's see. And I know Liberty is with us?
I'm here. Yes. Are you able to pull it up, Tara?
Is here.
Oh, yay. Okay. So this is the same report that was presented at the PY committee. It's on the top left corner. You'll see that it's for October 2020, which is 33% of the fiscal year. And I'm excited to present this report today because we have our actual allocations in. We have our October allocations. So I'm excited about that. So all the numbers for our revenue are final now. And the October allocations this year wasn't too bad. Altogether, it was only about 18,000 less than what we had anticipated, which is a whole lot better than it was last year. And then if you go to the bottom right of the reports, you will see that we are only 15% expended at this point in time. A large reason for that is the additional dollars that we receive for the National Dislocated Worker Grant. As you can see, we have that balance of $413,745 in that that pink column there. And those are really the highlights. The ITAs are also slow, and Tony already mentioned, and Jamie at the beginning of the meeting, that the work experience, that we've not been expending a lot of that to this point in time.
But we are working on doing so.
Right, we're working on expending those, which will, you know, change our overall percentage. Does anybody have any questions?
So this is Dave. Thanks, Liberty. This is a great opportunity, and I'm glad that you've got the actual numbers now. That's always been frustrating when those numbers are delayed.
Yes.
One thing I want to make sure, and I'm glad Jamie brought it up, was leaving the money on the table and making sure that we're utilizing the funds that we're to take care of. Is there a way that somewhere we can note the progress or the activity that we're making to make sure that we utilize our funds as quickly as possible? I know that there's some conversation sometimes inside some of the meetings, the full WIB meetings, about us not utilizing the money quickly enough. And I know that it's a process. Let me just finish just real quick and I'll let you talk. I know it's a process that is cumbersome and time consuming. And I just want to make sure that there's some way that we can be transparent in the efforts that we're putting forward to spend the money.
Right, which that's a little bit tricky, Dave, because we don't want to expend all of our WIOA funds. We actually want to have a balance, which at the moment we do have a balance, because we need carryover dollars to support us in the first almost 2 quarters of the new fiscal year. So we want to be careful with that. Now, the other grants, the work experience is an exception to that. We do need to get up to the 20% expenditure rate for the youth. This past fiscal year, we've been given a waiver where they have waived that for FY20, I'm sorry, FY20, the state and the federal government waived the 20% expenditure rate. They have not done that yet for 21. So that's why we, Tony and Ellen and them are, you know, trying to come up with a plan to help get us to that 20%. But we do monitor the expenditures on a regular monthly basis to look at that. But it's a very good point.
Well, I think you made a point earlier when you talked about the ITA funding being slow and slowly coming up. I remember where there were times when we didn't have enough ITA money and we had to delay. So with the economic condition the way it is, I think the more that we can utilize that funding as quickly, the better it's going to be for the community. So I just want to make sure that that we are moving forward, and somehow we can share that path forward with the full WIB somehow.
Yeah, Dave, I would just say I totally agree. One thing that we're doing is what you all just did at the beginning of the meeting, which is updating some of our policies around the work experience to hopefully make that program more interesting for both the employer partners and the youth clients. But I would be happy to work with Tony to kind of put together a little update in terms of, these are the kinds of things that are all going together. I mean, Tony meets with the KCC youth staff. She just met with them at least, I think, 3 times this week, different combinations of them to think through, okay, yeah, things are not like they used to be. And so what are some ways that we can adjust accordingly? Same with ITAs. I mean, there's just been a lot of changes in the world around, what our clients are thinking and getting to them. But like, for example, we did actually recently have a conversation with bringing the Gateway Community and Technical College staff to meet with all the KCC partners to talk about the Work Ready Scholarship. Now, that's not going to help us use our ITA money, but how are we making sure that we're leveraging all the different sources of financing in our community? And so, yeah, happy to kind of put together more of an update on those kinds of things so that you guys can see some of those efforts.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. And
Sure.
Liberty, thanks a lot. That was a great explanation. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah, we almost operate more on like an 18-month budget. It's like 12 months of funding over 18 months because of that October allocation being so delayed. We're on a fiscal year, but we don't really get the extra funding on the federal timeline until, well, we got it this year in December, and I think last year in December as well. So makes it a little tricky if we don't have any carryover, but obviously don't want to leave money on the table either. So did anybody else have questions for Liberty? Dana, the other thing that we sent out in the packet was the programmatic KPI, similar to the kinds of things that everyone sees each time we meet. So I wasn't sure if, if anybody had any questions, we'd be happy to answer those, but otherwise probably just leave it in the packet. Okay. So that concludes my portion of the report.
Okay. Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Liberty. Any other topics for the good of the group in the 8 minutes that we have? All right, take silence as a no. So if not, we'll go ahead and adjourn. I just want to let everybody know, have a happy holiday, Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Friday is my last day for 2 weeks, so yay, I'm going to enjoy some family time. I hope you all get to as well, and just stay safe and do something fun over the holidays.
Absolutely.
All right, everyone, take care. We'll see you next
Thanks,
year.
everybody.
Thank you.
Merry
Well,
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.